All right. Well, I think we will go ahead and get going, and folks who join later on will join when they can. But welcome everyone to our legislative launch focused on an act advancing clean energy, equity, and innovation in municipal utilities. My name is Logan Malik, and I'm the interim executive director at the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. I am so pleased to see you all here tonight and to be joined by a number of organizations who have co-sponsored this event. I am also so pleased to be joined by my fellow panelists to discuss this legislation and why it is so critical for our clean energy transition and for our, to ensure that we are meeting our clean energy targets. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Please make sure that you mute yourself for the duration of the presentation. And we'll be sure to open things up for Q&A before the end. So you'll be able to kind of engage then. This is a recorded event, so if you are concerned about that, feel free to keep your screen off, and that shouldn't be a problem at all. We are going to be getting started, and if you have not yet, please go ahead and share your name and the town you're calling in from in the chat, so we know where folks are coming from. So as I mentioned, we are going to be conducting a series of presentations, and we're going to have some remarks before we get going, but we will have a Q&A. If you have any questions that you want to remember as things are going, feel free to drop a question in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to it during that Q&A process. Quickly, I just want to mention MCAN and who we are. We are a climate advocacy organization with over 68 chapters across the Commonwealth, and we are working to support and empower local communities in taking action and advancing clean energy and a just transition in their communities and across the state. And from our perspective, it's all about local action. We know that's where change is made, and sometimes that local action can be empowered and supported by statewide legislation that is critical to enabling that, like this legislation that we're here to talk about tonight. So our agenda is as followed. First, we are going to hear from our fantastic champions in the state Senate and in the House of Representatives, Senator Jamie Eldridge and Representative Cataldo. We are so grateful for your leadership and to have you here tonight. Then you will hear from me. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of this legislation and why MCAN sees this as such a critical effort for our clean energy transition and in addressing the climate crisis. Finally, we are going to hear from Dr. Tanya Stasio of the Applied Economics Clinic about some research and some analysis that they conducted on this legislation and various different pieces relating to what we'll be discussing and why it is so important. And then we'll conclude with an opportunity and really letting folks know how they can get involved and how they can be a part of advancing this important work. And finally, we'll open it up for Q&A. So there is a lot on the agenda and a lot of exciting stuff to look forward to. But first and foremost, I think I will turn it over to our legislative champions, and I will turn it over to you first, Senator Eldridge.
Great. Thank you so much, Logan, and good evening, everyone. Great to see such a great attendance at this MCAN-sponsored kickoff, really, of the legislation. I'm really proud to file with Representative Simon Cataldo. The legislation and act advancing clean energy, equity, and innovation within municipal utilities, I think really speaks to an area where there's really a gap in Massachusetts. um, regarding municipal power plants. And, right now, and I've been a legislator for about 20 years. In the past 2 years, many of the municipal power plants, including those that serve my district, Littleton Electric and Light and Hudson Power, are celebrating their 100th anniversaries. And that speaks to the fact that, 100 years ago, so the 1920s, a really powerful movement began in Massachusetts and many other states to bring municipal power to the people, to deliver, power that was generally had better service, also generally was more affordable, and was really accountable to the people, to the customers of the communities that are served by these power plants. That has been a powerful thing. And I know, many of my constituents in Littleton and Stowe and Boxborough, Hudson, they really appreciate the service by these municipal light plants. The reality, though, is that although they do a wonderful job, far too many of the municipal power plants, and again, not every one of them, but far too often these municipal light plants are not only not looking to invest more or rely more on clean energy, but they're not required to. They're not required to by our state energy laws, despite the fact that we've passed some, really groundbreaking legislation, I'd say the past 10 to 15 years. And therefore they're not required, unlike the investor-owned utilities, the NSTAR, national grids, to comply with reaching the 100% clean energy goal by 2030. And at first glance, I think there's a thought that municipal light plants only serve a very small percentage of the state. But the reality is they provide about 14% of the energy, the electricity to Massachusetts residents. And so if that source of power is coming from coal, if it's coming from gas, if it's coming from other sources of power that are not on the renewable energy portfolio, then it's going to be that much harder for us to meet our 2050 roadmap goals, which we're already, as I'm sure most people here on this meeting already know, we're already behind. So what this bill would do is it would require the munis to have the same standard and to comply to reach the same goals as the investor-owned utilities by 2030. And it's also recognizing, speaking to the deep roots of why munis were formed 100 years ago, that affordability piece. It also provides $50 million to help environmental justice communities, low or moderate income housing, and elderly housing, which exist in most communities in Massachusetts, to help with that transition. One of the things, sort of honest conversations I have with my constituents that are served by munis, is that they like the service and they like the low prices, and we recognize that. But I think also we need to have this bigger conversation about what are we making sure that every single community, every single resident is working to combat climate change at a time when we're already seeing climate impacts, and New England is going to face the most dire impacts, arguably, in the whole country. So really proud to file this bill with Representative Cataldo. He's quickly become a very strong voice on climate, and really give in his district in Concord, the Concord Municipal Light Plant, I think is already doing some very good things. But the reality is not every municipal light plant does that. And I'm engaging with the municipal light plants as well. We need to have those conversations. And Logan, I appreciate your leadership to bring up this idea. It's great to be here with Dr. Tanya Stasio from the Applied Economics Clinic to really get that substantive, detailed background on why this is so important. But I would just say, that every community needs to be doing its part. And I think more and more of our constituents are demanding that the state do more. And this is an area where there are munis across Massachusetts, where at the end of the day, these customers, these residents don't have any choice, and therefore they're getting their power, those that are served by munis, from nuclear power, from coal, from gas, and we really want to make that transition away. So very proud to file this bill. And I'm really hoping, as we look ahead to this session, that we can make progress on this legislation, pass it into law, and making sure that no matter what community you live in, you are working to reach that 100% clean energy goal as passed by previous legislation by 2030. So thanks again, Logan, and great to be on this panel today.
Thank you so much, Senator. And thank you for your many years of leadership, working on these issues of clean energy, of environmental justice, and a just transition. We so appreciate it, and we so value your partnership. And likewise, I'm so excited to have Representative Cataldo joining us as well. A new member, but it's very clear that he's already become a fantastic partner. And so with that, I do want to pass it over to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Logan, and good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Cataldo. I represent the 14th Middlesex District, which includes the towns of Acton, Carlisle, Chelmsford, and most importantly for tonight, Concord, because as Senator Eldridge just mentioned, Concord is an MLP community just a couple of weeks ago celebrating its 125th anniversary as a municipal light plant. Thanks to MCAN, Vote Solar, Green Roots, the Sierra Club, GP, PSR, and Dr. Stasio for hosting this evening. I just want to give a shout out to my legislative aide, Kyle Stapleton, who's on the Zoom as well, in my biased opinion, the hardest working legislative aide in the State House. And thank you to Senator Eldridge for filing the Senate companion of this bill and for being such a champion of clean energy in the legislature. I was so thrilled when I learned that I'd be working with Senator Eldridge on this bill, which was filed just shortly after the enactment of the Public Lands Protection Act. So congratulations again, Senator Eldridge, on that monumental achievement. And I hope we can have similar success with this important bill. Just so everyone knows, Chairman Sean Garbely of Arlington is also on the Zoom right now. He's the chair of the Global Warming and Climate Change Committee. Thanks, Mr. Chair, for joining us. I don't think I've had the opportunity yet to pitch him on this bill, so we'll try not to mess this up. That was a great summary by Senator Eldridge. Politicians are supposed to be really good at saying the same thing that the person before them said, but I'm pretty new at this, so I'm not going to try that. Instead, I just want to say two quick things to kind of draw you into some of my thinking and my perspective so far in the legislative process that I think might be helpful for you to know as advocates, new advocates or experienced advocates. One is, there's so much to commend this bill, but this process, this space of how we create energy, it's messy and it's complicated. And when we do that as legislators, we really need partners who understand how important it is to engage all the different stakeholders that have a part in making something like this happen. And that's where MCAN has come in and just been incredible. Not only in the important portion of this work, which is obtaining support, but also having the harder conversations with the stakeholders who may have challenges in getting to yes on this and supporting this. And so I just want to commend MCAN and let you know as advocates how important I think it is to have partners who don't just virtue signal, don't just wave a flag, but are really willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work. And Logan and his team at MCAN have been fantastic on that from my perspective. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and I know we're going to return to this at the end of this call, but I think it's important that you hear it from me, is a little bit about how legislators make decisions. I'm part of a 160-person House, and so I don't get to decide anything on my own. When you reach out to your state legislator about a bill that you care about, it is incredibly important. So when Kyle and I get hundreds of constituent requests for bills a week, and as we're sorting through that, we're looking at two different things. First is the volume. Are we getting one email that's a form email about an issue? Are we getting 20? Are we getting 100? That's going to make a difference in terms of what I prioritize for co-sponsorship and how I spend my time. The other is the depth of the communication. So actually just a couple of days ago, I got an email from on a mental health bill. It was a bill that I had never heard of, but it was a personalized email, and it encouraged me to quickly look deeply into that issue, and I ended up signing on to that. So the takeaway from that, I think, is simple. Do what MCAN is asking. If you have the 1 or 2 minutes that it takes, fill out the form. I actually did it to practice to see how long it took earlier today. It took me less than 60 seconds to do that and to send the email to myself. And if you have an extra minute, give a sentence or two to your rep or your senator about why this is important to you. I'll stop there because we're going to learn a lot about the substance of this bill, and we just heard some important points. Thank you again so much, and I'm looking forward to working with you on all this.
Thank you so much, Representative Cataldo, for your leadership and for your partnership, and also for your insight on how we can effectively advocate for legislation that we support in the House and the Senate. And we will get to it and get to why this is so important and why it's important to what you can do to actually move the needle forward on this legislation. But before we do that, and Senator Eldridge did a great job of an initial summary, I want to spend some time talking about this legislation, an act advancing clean energy, equity, and innovation in municipal utilities. I want to share what it is and why we feel it is so important. And I am going to do that by kind of listing out 5 different reasons that I care about, that I think, we have really identified as being critical in our thinking behind why we support this legislation. But before we do that, just a quick recap to make sure everyone on the call has this understanding, because this impacts not only communities and municipal utilities, this fundamentally impacts our ability to transition to a clean energy future as a state. But municipal utilities make up one of 2 types of electric utilities in Massachusetts. The first is your investor-owned utilities, those for-profit utilities like National Grid and Eversource. The second is municipal light plants, and these are nonprofit utilities that are owned by their municipalities and that are governed at a local level. And Senator Eldridge talked about this, but there are 41 municipal utilities across the Commonwealth that collectively serve 50 communities. And they represent approximately 14% of the state's total electricity. Now, that might sound like, not very much, but when you think about what is at play and the need for us to meet the moment of the climate crisis, it is not insignificant, and it does come into play, and it's something that we have to consider. This outlines where the MLPs are across the Commonwealth, and you can see that they are dispersed in a number of communities all across the state, from north to south to central and west. I want to highlight here, something that really is at the center of MCAN focusing on this, and that is that municipal utilities, or MLPs, are the preferred model of utility. We see them as the best. We see them as what, we would like to see more municipal utilities across the state, because that direct power, of being able to control and influence your energy future is so valuable at that local level. However, just like any other utility, we really need to, as a state, make sure that they're not off on their own, kind of when it comes to the climate crisis, and that they are pulling their weight and advancing clean energy in a way that matches the moment and that matches the crisis that we are facing. So that's the case. MLPs are fantastic. They are great. We want to see them do better. We want to see them be better. And that is what this legislation is all about. And it's about increasing guidelines as well as increasing resources for the MLPs to do that. And so what does this legislation do? It does three primary things. The first is it requires municipal utilities to meet the renewable portfolio standard by 2030. And it supports smaller and lower income communities in making that transition. The second is it requires municipal utilities to meet the clean peak standard by 2030. And then the third piece, as Senator Eldridge mentioned, is it establishes a fund of $50 million specifically to support municipal utility projects that enable and support environmental justice communities, affordable housing, and elderly housing in transitioning to a clean energy future. So I'm going to talk about why these things are so important and why we see these three actions as so critical to addressing the climate crisis. And I do also just want to add that we have had fantastic discussions, and we continue to identify how this, legislation and how our approach to getting to where we see as needing to be can be adjusted so that it is, truly advancing the priorities that we see as necessary. But we do see this as necessary, and it's not just MCAN or our fantastic legislative partners. As of now, 27 organizations have signed a letter in support of this bill and have already kind of jumped in as co-sponsors of this presentation. But they agree with us that this needs to that action needs to be taken, and these groups are local groups, they're regional groups, they're statewide groups, and so we are really coming together to recognize that action needs to be taken. Now, why? I'm going to get into 5 reasons why we think this legislation is important. So the first reason is very straightforward. When it comes to clean energy, and specifically in the energy mix, MLPs are lagging behind. And if we do not take action, that lag will continue. And it is expected to continue like it would continue in an investor-owned utility if there were not increased regulations. So let me explain this in a little bit more detail. And this specifically focuses on the renewable portfolio standards. So the renewable portfolio standards was a policy that was implemented in 2003. And it basically called on retail electricity suppliers to supply and obtain a percentage of the electricity that they serve to their customers from clean, qualifying renewable energy facilities. That means, and when they say clean, qualifying renewable energy facilities, they're talking about wind, they're talking about solar, they're talking about geothermal and small hydro. Now, as you can see from this table, in 2003, that started at 1% clean renewable energy. In 2015, it jumped to 10%, and then 16% in 2020. Now we are at 22% in 2023. And by 2030, there will be a requirement for electricity suppliers to have 40% clean energy in their energy mix. Now, while this is well and good, this requirement was not extended to municipal utilities. So back in 2003, this did not apply to MLPs. And the implications there is they have not been taking action in this way. So let me just show a study that MCAN conducted, and we analyzed the energy mix of every single one of the MLPs, with the exception of a very, very small one, and we found that collectively, when you look at that clean energy, at aggregate, 2.43% of the energy from MLPs was coming from clean energy. Now that expands when you look at non-emitting energy. So you look at older facilities like large hydro and nuclear energy. but still 2.43%. And this was conducted back in 2020. And at that time, as I mentioned, the rest of the state was required to have 16% clean energy in their energy mix. Now, there are some details behind this, which I don't want to get into, but I will add that MLPs have made investments in other ways, but they have not been able to legally account for the clean energy investments that they have made because they are not actually retiring the associated certificates that would enable them to take credit. Instead, they're selling them to the investor-owned utilities who have these requirements to meet. Now, I just want to add some color to this. When you look at the 2020 data, the picture becomes all the more clear. And what it shows is that MLPs could account for just 0.12% of energy from solar, 2.17% from wind energy, 10% from hydropower, and then when you look at the non-emitting energy, the majority of that is coming from nuclear energy across MLPs. I do just want to add here that this is, that there are leaders in this space. There are multiple MLPs like Concord and Belmont and Wellesley that are meeting the RPS and that were meeting the RPS back in 2020. But the majority of MLPs have not taken that step. And so we really see it as critical that like what we did with investor-owned utilities, the only way we're going to see change is if we require it at a statewide level. And if we bring municipal utilities up to the same pace and the same policies that we're seeing across the state. Now let's look at it from the clean peak standard and why this is important. MLPs have made in the recent past unjust and harmful decisions when thinking about meeting peak demand. And we see one of the reasons for this as being the fact that they are not required or incentivized to do anything else. So let me explain this a little bit further. And I think the best example that many folks know is the Peabody Peaker. So the Peabody Peaker is a 55 megawatt new facility, a brand new facility that is powered by oil and gas, that is being constructed as we speak in an environmental justice community in the city of Peabody. This project will cost $85 million to ratepayers, and it will result in significantly expanded natural gas infrastructure, as well as essentially tying communities to utilizing this energy to meet peak demand for the next 10, 20, 30 years if policies don't change that and force an early retirement. Now, who is owning this? Who is kind of responsible? It is 14 municipal utilities across the state. So it's not just Peabody. It's 14 municipal utilities. And again, there's no real incentive for them to do otherwise at this point. And we've seen that there's an incentive for them to reduce peak energy demand, but not to clean it. Now, the Peabody Peaker, while a very, very clear example of moving in the wrong direction, is not the exception. It is actually the norm. When you look at how MLPs are powering peak energy demand, when everyone is using their energy in the winter or the summer, we see that a lot of it is coming from investments in oil and in dirty peaking facilities. So, we did a quick analysis, and I will say this is a back of the envelope analysis of all of the peaking power plants across the Commonwealth. And we found that of the 29 remaining peakers that do not have a clear plan to transition to clean alternatives, 40% of them, or 11 of them, were owned by MLPs. Now that could be because they made investments back in the day, and before the climate crisis was top of mind. It could have been for a number of different reasons. But in order to meet our climate targets, we need to move away from these facilities. We need to see incentives and requirements that enable communities to transition away from these dirty facilities. And again, we do not have this now because MLPs are not meeting the Clean Peak Standard. So what is the Clean Peak Standard? This was a policy that was adopted back in 2018, and it requires, again, like the RPS, it requires that electricity providers meet peak energy demand or with a minimum percentage of qualified clean peak energy resources. So this is a small portion of the energy mix. It's 1.5% of the total energy that is used, but this is the dirtiest energy that we see being used. And so this policy was really put in place to start moving the needle forward, to start saying, hey, we need to make investments in clean peaking power, in projects like battery storage and other storage projects that can support the grid during times when demand for energy is very high. Again, this is not something that MLPs are currently meeting, and that is, we have to be asking ourselves why. Why are MLPs not meeting this standard when they do have such a large share of existing peaking power plants across the Commonwealth? The third reason why we see this bill as being important is related to equity. We really see these exemptions as causing concerns when you look at it from an equity perspective, and when you look at it from a perspective of who is paying for and who has the burden of transitioning our Commonwealth to a clean and just energy future. And the reason is, you have to look at, why are MLPs getting exemptions, and who is actually, constituting these exemptions. And, I think what we find is that MLPs are disproportionately wealthier and disproportionately less diverse than the rest of the state. So, just looking at median incomes, 38 of the 50 communities that are served by MLPs have a median income above the state median income. From a racial justice perspective, the instance is even starker. We see that 46 of the 50 communities served by MLPs are less diverse than the state average. So again, we have to be asking ourselves, why are there exemptions, and who are they serving, and how does that result in an equitable sharing of the burden that is required to meet the moment of the climate crisis? I will say that this has real tangible implications when you look at it from a rate perspective. MLPs, to their credit, do a fantastic job keeping their rates low. And this picture just describes that. The yellow are investor-owned utilities. The blue are a number of, are all the other municipal utilities. And you see that all of the MLPs have lower rates than investor-owned utilities. Now, that's a good thing. We want to keep it that way. We want to keep driving affordability and moving that forward, but not at the expense of taking climate action, and not at the expense of ensuring that our state collectively is meeting the climate crisis. And so, we really see this as an important equity consideration, and, as an understanding that, the burden of meeting the RPS and the Clean Peak Standard should be shared across the entire state. The fourth reason I will just add is, there are existing requirements for MLPs, but they're not encouraging the investment that we want to see in clean new energy. And so, what are we talking about when we think about existing regulations? Back in 2021, the legislature passed a fantastic provision which implemented a greenhouse gas emission standard for municipal utilities. This requires that MLPs by 2030 have 50% non-emitting energy. By 2040, that number jumps up to 75. By 2050, that is 100% non-emitting. Now, that is great, and we want to see that. The problem here that we see is that there is very little specification around what is actually meeting that goal. And if you look at the language, you see that MLPs could meet this requirement using efficient gas, using 100% nuclear, or using old hydro 100%. And doing so, again, while decarbonizing, it does not incentivize the deployment that we need for a massive amount of clean resources, from facilities like solar and wind, geothermal, et cetera. And so, what we're asking is, we're not saying get rid of the GGS, we're saying complement the GGS and stipulate that a percentage of these requirements come from clean and new facilities. And that will go a very long way in moving the needle forward on the clean energy market in Massachusetts and the region as a whole. The final piece I want to touch on is related to that third bucket, that $50 million that we see as being important to give to municipal utilities, and specifically for the investment in environmental justice communities. And the reason is because there are still a lack of opportunities for environmental justice residents in municipal utilities to transition to clean energy. And I want to just give you an example looking at energy efficiency and based on an analysis that MCAN conducted. So back in 2020, we saw that the majority of municipal utilities spent less than 1% on their energy efficiency programs. Now, compared to Mass Save is, was required legally to spend 12 times more than that, 12 times more than that on a basis of revenue that is coming in. And when you look at where that money is going to, you see that there's not the investment in environmental justice communities that we need. So, of the 40 MLPs, we only saw 8 MLPs provided increased incentives for environmental justice in low-income communities, which, while these communities are disproportionately on average wealthy and less diverse, that doesn't mean that there are not folks who are lower income and in environmental justice. They need to be supported. We did not see, very many instances where there were increased incentives for those folks who could stand to benefit from these investments in energy efficiency. The final piece kind of translates to the outreach, and we saw that only 5 of the 40 MLPs were conducting targeted outreach to low income and environmental justice communities. And so, there are structural components here that, we should not deny. MLP, the reason why investor-owned utilities are doing more and doing better relates to structural requirements that they legally have to make. If investor-owned utilities weren't required to do it, they wouldn't. But we need to pay attention to this, and we need to acknowledge that there has been a lack of investment disproportionately for environmental justice communities living in municipal utilities. We see it as critical to change that. And so with that, I know that was a long discussion. I hope you gain some understanding of why this legislation is so important. And I want to pass it over to Dr. Stasio, who will tell us, who will provide us with more insight into the numbers behind why this is important and how it will contribute to transitioning our state as a whole to clean energy.
Hi, everybody. Just give me a moment here to orient with my several monitors. Okay. Thank you so much, Logan and Lily, for having me and for all the various lively discussions that we've had over the months while putting this together. It's been a pleasure. I am talking to you all today about the Massachusetts MLP exemption from the RPS, as you've all heard. And what that means for clean energy in Massachusetts. And I worked on this with a couple of colleagues of mine, Elizabeth Saliga, as well as Elizabeth Stanton, Dr. Elizabeth Stanton. So very briefly, the Applied Economics Clinic is a mission-based nonprofit consulting group, Massachusetts based as well, that offers expert services related to the topics of equity, energy, and environment, where most of our clients are primarily public interest groups like nonprofits, government agencies, and green business associations. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover three main things. Firstly, the Massachusetts RPS and clean energy standard targets compared to the MLP GGES, as Logan just discussed. Talking about who lives within MLPs, a brief equity analysis, and then lastly, our main findings, the MLP exemption from the renewable portfolio standard and what that means for clean energy. So starting off here with this graph, on the vertical axis is the required percentage of renewable Massachusetts electric sales. So here at 100%, all of Massachusetts electric sales would be derived from renewable energy sources like wind or solar. The renewable portfolio standard, or RPS, which is marked here in blue, required 19% of electric sales in 2023 to be derived from renewable energy sources, which rises to 60% by 2050. The CES adds on to the renewable portfolio standard and requires 26% of electric sales in 2023 to be required from renewable energy sources. Renewable energy certificates or clean energy certificates are issued to renewable energy sources on a per megawatt hour basis. So 1 megawatt hour of generated electricity from solar is equal to 1 REC or SIC. Massachusetts MLPs, though, do not have to comply with the RPS or the CES, but instead have to comply with the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Standard, or GGES, which includes renewable, nuclear, and/or efficient gas purchases in terms of which technologies you can use to comply. So here in this table, we have the Massachusetts standards, the RPS, the Clean Energy Standard, and the GGES. Sorry. So the GGES is much more inclusive and less stringent than the RPS or the CES because you can use nuclear or efficient gas to meet their 50% of sales target in 2030 compared to the CES or the RPS, which does not include nuclear or efficient gas in its applicable technologies. Sorry, I'd messed up my system with my screens. Okay. Towns with MLPs and equity analysis. So who lives in MLPs? There are 320,000 households living within towns that have electric service from MLPs, which represents about 12% of all of Massachusetts households. On average, MLP service towns, as Logan had mentioned, are wider and earn higher incomes compared to utility service towns. The median household income in Massachusetts is about $84,000 compared to $109,000 in MLP serviced towns. Relatedly, 23% of residents in MLP towns live within environmental justice or EJ communities, compared to 43% of residents in utility service towns. If we look at the second table here in the fourth column, MLP customers use more energy on average compared to utility service customers and therefore pay higher energy bills per year compared to utility service customers, despite having lower electricity costs per megawatt hour. About 9% of residents living in Massachusetts environmental justice communities are living within MLP service towns. This represents 216,000 people. So as you can see from the map here, environmental justice communities are spread throughout Massachusetts, as Logan touched on. And a lot of these communities, over 200,000 people, are living within MLP towns. Okay, so the the MLP exemption from the RPS. Massachusetts utilities are required to comply with the RPS by buying RECs equal to the required percentage of their customer sales for that compliance year, as we mentioned. And RPS Class 1 requirements, which is the focus of this analysis, increase 1% annually and are met with RECs that are created from renewable generation built after 1997. In contrast, Class 2 requirements change every year, and they're met with RECs that are created from older generation units. So, just going to take a minute before I get into the heavy part. Okay. AEC has estimated the amount of additional Class 1 renewables that would have been incentivized in 2 base case scenarios and 2 counterfactual scenarios. So in our 4 scenarios of renewable energy purchases, number 1 and 2 here are the baseline scenarios, which are based on today's laws, where MLPs comply with the GGES using more Class 1 renewable energy, that's renewable energy built after 1997, than is required. So that's scenario 1, versus complying with the GGES using other sources, that's scenario 2. Scenario 3 and 4 are hypothetical scenarios where MLPs comply with the renewable portfolio standard, either since the inception in 2003 or beginning in 2030 when the GGES comes into effect. Across all 4 scenarios, we are assuming that nuclear sales do not grow and that MLP total sales do not grow. So we're really just affecting how much Class 1 can grow and how much other renewable energy or non-emitting energy, as the GGES puts it, can grow. Okay. So if we look here on the vertical axis, we see MLP Class 1 electric sales in gigawatt hours. In blue, we have our 2 base case scenarios where the bottom line is what is required. So MLPs can meet the GGES without increasing their Class 1 renewable energy at all. They could also meet the GGES with Class 1 renewable energy that exceeds the RPS in 2050, but they don't have to. In green, we have 2 hypothetical scenarios where the MLPs comply with the RPS since inception. Sorry, we just put 2020 because we decided to show it in snapshots. So RPS in 2020, and then in dark green, comply with the RPS in 2030. And that is the share of Class 1 electric sales that MLPs would have under those 2 scenarios. Notice that it's higher than the required amount by the GGES in 2030, in 2040, and barely there in 2050. And again, I want to highlight that MLPs are not required to increase Class 1 renewable energy under the GGES more than that bottom lower bound, but they can't. And then on the right here is the same information, just shown in a different way. That just makes it a little bit easier to see stepwise the difference between RPS compliance versus GGES compliance in those 2 different scenarios. Okay, so if we relax the assumption a little bit, that where we assume that Class 1 renewable energy does not grow, and instead allow Class 1 renewable energy to grow 0.18% as it did from 2019 to 2020. If we do that, the results do not change. MLP aggregate class 1 sales only grew by such a small amount from 2019 to 2020 that if we applied this growth rate over time, there would still be very little class 1 renewable energy being added under this business as usual case. So, key takeaways. Far from incentivizing renewable energy purchases, the greenhouse gas emissions standard and the RPS exemption permit MLPs to remain at today's level of class 1 renewables. They do not need to increase the amount of electric sales that come from wind and solar resources, new wind and solar resources. In 2030, MLPs are not required to add anything. In 2040, they're not required to anything. And in 2050, they're not required to add anything. And by 2050, MLP compliance with the GGS results in, my laptop is in the way, 4,200 gigawatt hours, which is 18% of Massachusetts 2021 renewable energy credits, less class 1 renewables than would be required by the RPS. So that's 4,200 gigawatt hours less clean energy in Massachusetts than would be provided had the MLPs complied with the RPS instead of the GGES in 2050. And I kept it brief so that we could open it up for questions. Thank you again so much for having me. I'll pass it back to Logan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tanya, for that incredible summary. And I think, you know, it's really important to highlight that final piece about, you know, a lack of investment, you know, a lack of renewables that we could have seen across our state because of the demand for, you know, these class 1s and you know what we are missing out on. So I know that there was a lot of information tonight, and we will have more, and we'll continue to provide helpful resources to break this information down for you and to support. But right now and into the future, what we need is we need to bring this conversation to the legislature, and we need to do it in a big way. You know, again, the details will continue to be refined and we'll continue to have very valuable discussions. But right now, it's super important that we tell our legislators that this issue matters, that it deserves their attention, and that we want to see progress on these areas. We want to see increased action from municipal utilities, and we want to see investments in the environmental justice communities, those over 200,000 residents in MLP communities that historically have not had access to the same programs that would enable them to transition to clean energy. So that is what we should do right now, is using our letter, which I've just dropped in the chat. Please, you know, Representative Cataldo outlined it at the beginning. It takes 60 seconds. Please take a moment to write to your senator, to write to your state representative, and to tell them why this matters. And it's great to use the automated letter, but also please personalize it. There's a really easy way to do it when you use this link. You know, add a personal narrative around why you think this is important and why and why this deserves attention. Make sure to include their names and make sure that you know that folks in the legislature understand that this is in fact coming from you. And while, you know, it's a helpful template, it is coming from you know, their constituent. This is so critical at this moment to bring up and advance the discussion that we know is important around ensuring that there is an equitable distributions of burdens and benefits as part of our clean energy transition. So with that, I know that it is 6:59, but I do want to open things up, and I do want to to discuss a few questions that were raised in the chat, and maybe we can also get a few questions live as well. But I'm going to open it up, and I will. I'll ask. I know Representative Cataldo has to leave in a few minutes, and hopefully Dr. Stasio can hang on as well. But I will go ahead and ask a few questions. So the first question that I'm seeing is from Judith Black, and it was about efficient gas, and maybe this is for you, Tanya. You know, trying to get an understanding of what is efficient gas and why is this something that we're including in our regulations that are supposed to bring us to net zero.
Hi, Logan. I'm not quite sure that I'm the person to speak on why it's included in the legislation. I will say that, you know, it's easier to include efficient gas than it would be to not. And I'm sure, you know, yeah, I won't speak to things that I'm not personally aware of, but we didn't look into sort of what they mean by efficient gas. But my assumption is that what they mean by that is new gas, and they just call it efficient gas. But please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's great, and I think, you know, the primary point here is that at the end of the day, you know, we really see this as something that you know that does need to change, and it's all the more reason for us to require these minimum standards in, you know, as part of the GGES, you know, through implementing the renewable portfolio standards and the clean peak standards, because that is just not what's going to get us towards a clean and just energy future. It's just not. So I think that you know, just a good piece. I'm curious. So there was a question by Kimberly French about are there projections of how much rates could increase in MLP towns to meet the bill's requirements by 2030, or how much it will cost the average MLP, and how much it could pay for. So I will kick this off, and I'll pass it to whoever wants to join in. I would say there is not. And the reason is because it varies significantly across municipal utilities. And there are certain circumstances, you know, where it would be harder, and certain circumstances where it would be easier to make this transition. And so, you know, in the long run, I think, you know, this variety is something that we do need to pay attention to. And I think what we do want to avoid is price shocks. So, you know, what we've discussed is making some adjustments that may support communities that for one reason or another would have a harder time making this transition by 2030, and supporting them with coming up with alternative solutions. You know, that is some feedback that we've received that, you know, that I think, you know, would be very worth incorporating into this. But again, the history is really important to keep in mind, you know, and the fact that that MLPs have been benefiting from this exemption for the past 20 years. And so, you know, I do not want to sugarcoat it. I do think rates will increase, you know, and I think we've seen in Concord and Belmont and in Wellesley that they have increased, but not too much. And they're meeting the RPS now, and still maintaining rates that are below investor-owned utilities. But, you know, we do need to be realistic, and you know, there will likely be an impact on rates, and we need to make sure that impact is minimized for the most vulnerable residents through a low income rate. Tanya, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So if MLPs were required to comply with the renewable portfolio standard and those class 1 requirements, the most that they would be required to pay would be the compliance payment, which is the payment that is required when you do not meet your RPS class 1 requirement. So in 2019, this amount was about $70 per megawatt hour in 2019. So if you really wanted to, you could see sort of like what your town's energy mix looks like and figure out, you know, what would that additional cost be in the aggregate. But as Logan mentioned, the components of MLP rates are not super transparent or available to the public. So it's hard for us to know exactly how rates would change, because if they're adding on renewable energy, we have to assume that maybe they'd be retiring other energy, which would alter their costs. So at most we can say that they'd be required to pay about $70 per megawatt hour, which is that compliance payment for if you did not meet your RPS class 1 requirement.
Great. That's a really helpful addition, that the fact that there is in fact a ceiling, that, you know, it's not infinite, and that, you know, you can actually identify what the maximum payment would be. I think that's a really helpful piece to keep in mind. Ken McDonald asked, what was the argument against supporting these bills? You know, I think there are probably a few, Ken, to be honest, and you know, I think that's you know, we are going to see some you know, concerns raised from MLPs. I think, you know, it may stir around the impacts on rates. It may also focus on you know, an argument that taking action in this way is not the most effective way to go about it. So, you know, instead of doing this, and instead of meeting these minimum standards, you know, in the energy mix, municipal utilities should use their unique privileges of owning and operating facilities to invest directly in renewable energy projects, and, you know, to sell the renewable energy credits to investor-owned utilities, for example. I think that there is an interesting argument there, and you know, I think we do need to make sure that we're supporting efforts like that. And I think there are some slight, you know, shifts on this legislation that could do that. But I also think it's really, really important to note that the vast majority of MLPs, there are exceptions, but MLPs, you know, would not do that. They would, you know, naturally we're seeing that MLPs are still lagging behind in that investment. And so, you know, I think we can talk about different mechanisms, about providing flexibility so that MLPs can contribute effectively to a clean and just energy transition. But what is very clear now is that the regulations and the requirements are not in place to adequately ensure and incentivize that these communities will be transitioning at a pace that aligns with our state, and that actually advances clean energy like wind, like solar, like geothermal. So I hope that kind of answers some questions. I am conscious that it is 7:08, so I think I will close the Q&A, but I do just want to conclude by again asking folks to write to their legislators. Again, this is about raising a conversation. It's about introducing this concept and saying, we need action in this area. We need increased requirements. We need increased investments in these communities to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of burdens and benefits as part of the state's clean energy transition. And so I will stay on for a few minutes to allow folks to take a minute to write to their legislators and to say that we need action now. But for all intents and purposes, I think we will go ahead and wrap up the event. And I just want to conclude by thanking you all so much for being here, for your attention to this issue, and for your commitment to seeing a just and equitable transition to clean energy in our Commonwealth.